Hello, and welcome to the Swansea Museum Talks. This is a talk brought to you by Swansea Museum and Fusion, a Welsh Government Assembly initiative. Swansea Museum is part of City and County of Swansea, and this particular talk is about the Mumbles Railway, which of course is fondly remembered by everyone who could remember it. Of course, from the museum point of view, the most significant thing is that in historic terms, it's the first passenger railway in the world. What we're going to do is look at the history of the railway, and towards the end then we'll see images of what people fondly remember. But let's start with what we ended up with. Here's a little map you can see of the railway. And of course, it started off at Rutland Street Station, and of course that would now be St David's multi-storey car park, and it went through St Helens, which was its official name, but everybody called it the Slip, Bryn Mill, Blackpill, and down to Oystermouth originally, only as far as Oystermouth originally. The railway opened in 1804. But the earliest document that we have in the museum is a plan of the railway, which was drawn up in 1803. And as you can see in the top right hand corner, it says navigable canal and a rail or tram road. The Swansea Canal, running from Abercrave down to Swansea, had only just opened back about 8 years previously, and it ended well below the where High Street train station is now, and of course it was to sort of bring coal down from the valley. Now the point of the Mumbles Railway was, of course, as all railways in those days, was to carry freight. It was mainly to carry limestone from Oystermouth into Swansea, and if you look at early sort of references to it, they're pretty much looking at a canal in reality, but possibly due to a bet between two industrialists about whether or not a steam locomotive could pull a certain amount of coal a certain distance and at a certain speed. They may have taken notice of this and decided to opt for a railway instead. So from 1804, when the railway first opens, to 1877, it's a horse-drawn railway, and we have this replica carriage in the tram shed, which is just around the corner from the museum. Now, this, of course, this is pre-photography in 1804 when the railway first starts. So we have no photographs of it then, but the carriage was actually based on a drawing done by an American tourist in 1811 who took a ride on it. And of course, in those days, if you were travelling, you'd have a little sort of logbook of to write up sort of diary and make little drawings. It's not a very good drawing, but enough to base this on. And of course, what's significant is that in 1807, in the last week of March, passenger services begin to run on it. A guy by the name of Benjamin French took out a license with the company for £20 per annum to carry passengers, and this is the historic proof, which proves that the Mumbles Railway was the first passenger railway in the world. Now, the first services ran in the last week of March in 1807, but it didn't really make the news, probably because, well, the significance of it wasn't realised at the time. But also there was a much bigger story in the news that week, and that was the Act for the Abolition of the Slave Trade was going through Parliament. So it was not seen as any significant event at the time. So it's kind of 1850, 1860 before we see any actual photographs of the Mumbles Railway. And here's a picture of the terminus at Oystermouth. As you can see, quite a large carriage. Looks like plenty of people inside, plenty of people on top, one person standing on the footrail, only two horses, two poor horses to carry all that lot. So if that's maybe the first class, then straight to third class. So you can see probably a nice hot summer's day, and they just put on a big cart basically. So from 1877 to 1929, the Mumbles Railway, it was the age of steam. Now, they didn't just switch over to steam in 1877, they decided to trial it first. This picture shows a locomotive, a Hunslet engine, which was acquired in 1881. And this is the kind of steam locomotive that would have been used on the Mumbles Railway at this point. There was some opposition to the Mumbles Railway going over to steam, because a lot of people were frightened about frightening the horses and carriages, the smoke, the noise. But once the trial was underway, people decided that they quite liked it being steam powered, and we see things like this. This is a petition which runs to about 14 pages, people signing to say that the Mumbles Railway ought to go over to steam. But it didn't turn out that way for quite a while, probably because of the cost, but for about 20 years you actually had steam engines and horse-drawn carriages on the same track. It wasn't for about 20 years before it fully went over to steam. So in the days of steam we see photographs like this. This is the sands at Swansea. You can see the Bayview Hotel there just on the top right, and you can see people on the Mumbles Railway just behind the seawall there. And this is at the slip, and probably judging by the photograph, it's kind of early morning. It looks like the sort of beach stalls are still setting up at this. The Mumbles Railway obviously was quite popular, and this picture kind of gives you an idea of that. This is probably maybe a bank holiday or a nice sunny Sunday, and you can see they just put on cattle trucks, and in this picture we can see about 10, and you can't see the end of the actual train. But just to give an indication, bank holiday Monday 1913, the Mumbles Railway carried 48,000 passengers in just one day. This picture is a steam train at the station in Blackpill, and you can see a nice Bovril advert there, and quite strange looking carriages, quite tall, so people inside, but and then you've got people outside on top of the train, which, you know, it just looks like they sort of standing in a big bathtub. In 1899, the railway is finally extended to Mumbles. They extended it, so it only ran to Oystermouth up until this point, when they built Mumbles Pier. And so we can see a picture here of a train heading towards Mumbles Pier after the line has been extended. Well, these days, I suppose, just to the left there, you'd probably, well, that would be a car park now, and Tiffany's, where you'd have an ice cream sort of in the corner. And of course, if you had a day out in Mumbles, then of course, it's time to try and get home again, and this is the crush looking to try and get back to Swansea after a nice day out at Mumbles. You can see the building just on the left of the picture is now gone, but obviously the buildings on the right are still there. If you can see the little circular on the facing the front of that building, there's a little circular motif, and that is still there. It's the logo of the Mumbles Railway Company. And you get some interesting postcards from the days of the Mumbles Railway. This one is it just says heavy traffic on the Swansea Mumbles Railway 1906, and you can see all the people there, inside the carriage, on top, and on the footrails. So obviously, don't think health and safety would allow that one these days. And as a result, we get some quite funny postcards as well. So this one just says the Mumbles Express. Everybody loaded onto it and it's all over it. And my favourite one, our local express. And just in case you can't read what it says underneath, it says Mumbles to Swansea and back the same day, if you're lucky. This is an interesting picture, probably taken about just before the start of the First World War, and obviously it's been taken from the Slip Bridge, which was opened in sort of 1913-14, and again we can see the Bayview Hotel there. You can see there's a few vehicles on the road, but they pretty much all horse-drawn, apart from the one just on the left, which of course is the future. It's a lorry, obviously with an internal combustion engine. Just to the right we can see the Swansea Sands, with the various beach stalls sort of set up, and it's a bit difficult to see, but just towards the top of those stalls you can see what looks like the swing, the swings, that we used to see on the beach, even up to sort of like around the early 70s. And of course you've got the Mumbles Railway there coming down, and on the other side of the wall you'd have the LMS lines, and if you were to follow those LMS lines up towards Swansea, you'd get to Swansea Victoria train station, which currently now is where the LC2 or the leisure centre is now built. Another picture of Mumbles Railway, and I quite like this picture. It's just shows you that whatever carriages I suppose they had to hand. So you've got 4 different types of carriage just on the being pulled by one steam locomotive, all very different to the trains we see today. So this is an interesting picture, and obviously we can see crowds looking at a steam train coming down, and look what looks like a bride and groom sitting on top of it. And if you're very observant, there's something very wrong with this picture. And if you can't work it out, it's because there's no steam coming out of that steam locomotive. This is actually a picture from 1954 celebrating the 150th anniversary of the railway, and that is a fake steam train with an electric car pushing it down the track. So this is to celebrate the 150th anniversary. So in 1929 and up until 1960, the Mumbles Railway goes over to electric. We now can have a cup of coffee in this building. It's now the Junction Cafe, but obviously originally it was actually built as the electric substation for the Mumbles Railway. And this is a photograph of two of the 13 carriages being built in Loughborough. The Mumbles Railway Company ordered 13 of these carriages, or tram cars, as we might describe them, and they were the largest tram cars that this company actually built. And so here we see a picture of Southend in Mumbles with one of the new electric tram cars. This is quite a nice picture, probably taken in the early 30s. You can just see just the one car on the road in Mumbles, which is interesting. Try and park down there these days. And this one is Southend as well. This is the mid-1950s. So it looks like a bit of a damp, miserable day in Mumbles here, and we see a Mumbles car coming into Southend station. But what's interesting is these, what you can see, those three look like circular blocks on the promenade there, and in fact, of course, those are tank traps still left over from the Second World War. So these were to prevent a German tank driving up the beach onto the promenade and then turning round and driving into Swansea. Another picture in the same area, and again I quite like this picture. It's we can see the boats just lined up right by the edge of the track. We can see a fisherman, by the look of him, repairing his nets there. Again, right at the side of the track. You can imagine health and safety these days. And if you can make it out, it's quite difficult to see, but you can see the shed there on the right. And on the door, it actually says private members only. So I did wonder for many years what on earth was going on in there. It turns out one day a gentleman was telling me when I was doing this talk that actually that is Mumbles Yacht Club before they had the actual yacht club built. And so we get to see what we remember now, and the tram cars are painted red, and this is the number 7, and the number 7 is the front end that survived, that's in the tram shed, is the actual number 7, this particular tram car. And of course, this is what they look like inside. So somebody's taken a photograph here of the inside of the top deck, and of course you probably remember is that the seats were reversible. So most people like to face the way they're travelling, so the conductor could knock the seats back, ready to, for the return trip to Swansea or Mumbles. And then if 4 of you got on, you could reverse one of the seats and sit there and talk to each other. Just a little section that I call people. This first photograph is a bunch of people all dressed up in 1920s costume, but actually, of course, it isn't the 1920s. This again is the celebration in 1954 for the 150th anniversary of the railway. This is another one from 1954, and you can see a woman there, and she's filling up a bucket with hot water. Now, what they're creating here is what would happen, when the trains came to the terminus in Oystermouth, and a steam train would let off boiling water. So, of course, the women would come running down with buckets. You could imagine, back in 1900, early 20th century, wanted to do a full laundry, then you'd need to boil that water on a fire. So much easier to go running down and get the hot water off the steam train. And if you look at the photograph, everybody is dressed in sort of Victorian costume, and you could probably, if you could actually probably get away with thinking that this was a picture from Victorian times. But if you just see between the man and the woman just behind, it looks like Blakey from On the Buses has kind of sneaked into the picture and ruined it. So in 1958, South Wales Transport announced that they're going to close the Mumbles Railway. Why do they want to close it? Well, because buses are much easier. Railways can be quite expensive to maintain, and of course your bus is much more flexible. It can go down the Mumbles Road, and it can turn off and go up to the new estate at West Cross and come back down, go round to Oystermouth, go round to Caswell, and of course a train can't do that. So they announced in 1958 that they intend to close it. There is several public meetings, a 14,000 signature petition, but they go ahead and close. So we see a picture right towards the sort of end, really. Again, we're back at the slip over the Bayview Hotel in the left-hand corner, and we can see the Mumbles Railway, and to the left of it we can see, well, the enemy, a bus. On the 5th of January 1960, the last of the Mumbles Railway trains run. So this is the terminus at Rutland Street, and you can see crowds of people are out to wave it goodbye. And you can see a sort of placard on the front of the train there, which is a replica of the carriage that we have in the tram shed. And they were used in the 1954 celebrations, and they got them back out again for the final runs. So here we see again one of the trains on its final run with people waving goodbye to it. One of the Mumbles trains coming into Rutland Street. You can just see the Hancock's Brewery on the top right there. And well, you don't see knees like that anymore, do you? Or socks like that. This is the number 7 that's just left Rutland Street again on its final run. Where they stopped, they were scrapped. So as you can see from here, you can tell from the houses behind, this is actually road. And again, this is the way that has been cut. Means that is the number 7. Unfortunately, you can't see the number because it's facing the wrong way, but that will be the number 7 carriage that is the only surviving part of those tram cars. We can see here, this is another tram car. It's being scrapped. This is just on Oystermouth Road. It gives something for the children to play in for a while. And of course, this is why quite a lot of people had various souvenirs out of the Mumbles Railway, because people went in and took many of the seats and various other fittings. One of the tram cars was saved. It was cut in half, loaded onto railway wagons, and taken up to the north of England to a railway museum there and put back together. Unfortunately, they didn't have anywhere to store it. It was outside, it got vandalised, and unfortunately it ended up here. This is the last Mumbles Railway carriage on a scrap heap in the north of England. So it's It's a railway that's fondly remembered by people who are old enough to remember it. Uh, Unfortunately, I don't. But you know, obviously from a museum perspective, you know, the historic importance for us is the fact that it was the first passenger railway in the world. They had a wake. This is a picture of the wake. They carried a false coffin from Oystermouth down to Mumbles, and this is a photograph. We have an album of these photographs of some of the women actually at the wake. Lots of you will have ended up with one of these. It's the souvenir tickets that were sold towards the end. Many households in Swansea still have one of these in a drawer somewhere. And we'll just finish off with a picture of what people fondly remember. Two of the Mumbles Railway tram cars connected together and heading down Oystermouth Road with Swansea in the background, and just in the left hand corner you can see the tower of the Guildhall.